Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today we're going to be talking about mechanics, and the footage in the background continues to come in from Guild Wars Insider, who have been uploading their B-roll footage from the latest. I believe it might even be the press beta before that, I'm not 100% sure, but one of the press betas where they had lots of extra footage that they wanted to put up, so that will be continuing there. It should be a human in the starting area continuing their adventures. So yeah, we're talking about mechanics. You guys seem to lately have really taken to the lore stuff, which is awesome because I've always kind of seen MMO communities in general not caring so much about lore, so I'm really glad about that. But it does mean we're kind of running a little bit low on mechanics questions, so if you do have any other mechanics questions, please feel free to ask them in the comment section down below. And yeah, let's get started. So the first question was asked by GrimDaddy51, who said, not to be annoying, I don't know why you think you'd be annoying by the way, but are they going to have an NPC like Nicholas the Traveller? Very short, simple question. On the surface can be answered quite quickly with a simple, we've not heard yet, but really is a very cool topic because this relates into what players are going to continue doing when they've finished most of the content in the game. So with Guild Wars 1, they very much had a philosophy with PvE for a long while where players would complete the campaign and they didn't need really extensive endgame stuff because 6 months down the line the next campaign would be out anyway, people would play for that and then they'd continue on. Or they'd move to PvP, which is almost infinitely renewable, and that was kind of how things were. Obviously then Eye of the North came out and they thought, oh, it's fine, don't worry, it'll just be a couple of years before Guild Wars 2, we'll have the beta in 2008, don't worry about it. But Guild Wars 2 became more ambitious and all of a sudden it was 2008 and there was no sign of the game, and all of a sudden it's 2012 and we still don't have a definite release date. So there's been a long gap for Guild Wars 1 where it wasn't built from the ground up with a view to keeping people in PvE, and ArenaNet had to do a lot of tricky things to keep people playing the game and keep them interested. The first really was, as they were developing Eye of the North, they introduced title grind, which a lot of people are still upset about, but really I think was necessary for the game not to be a wasteland right now. But even that didn't really work, and a few years ago, I think it was 2009 this update came out, things were getting dire. A lot of people were leaving the game, there wasn't many new items, pretty much everyone that was really crazy about the game was reaching the end of their tether, and the population had dramatically dropped. So with Guild Wars, I believe it was their 5th anniversary, 5 years into the game. This was like 3 years after content had ceased to come out in the form of new things to buy. ArenaNet released a big update on their anniversary, which was aimed at keeping people playing the game. Now, there were two big parts of this update that achieved those ends. First, they introduced something called Zaician quests, and these were quests you can get from a certain hub in the neutral battle isles area, and you could accept them, and every day it would be a different quest that you could do, and these quests would require you to go back and complete a certain mission from the storyline in either normal mode or hard mode, and you'd get rewards for doing so from this quest. So not only would you get the reward from completing that mission of the campaign if you hadn't already done it, but you'd also get a reward from this quest on top of that, which would give you something called Zaician coins, and these coins could be collected, and when you had a vast amount of them you could trade them in for some really cool unique items. And this really got the community very interested in continuing to play the game, because not only that, there were also titles in the game at this point, and a lot of people saw this as an opportunity to say, right, well, I'll just come in game every day, do this Zaician quest, complete the mission that it's asking me to do, and not only will I get the reward from completing the chest, which could mean I get more inventory space for my character, which was a really big deal at the time because a lot of people were complaining that there wasn't gonna be much inventory space. Not only would they get that, but they could also get progress towards their titles, they get extra gold, and it was just win-win-win scenario, and it really revitalized the PvE community. It was brilliant. Another part of the update introduced something else that was aimed to do the same thing. This was the introduction of a character called Nicholas the Traveller. Now, Guild Wars 1, you don't really think it that much, at least I don't think Guild Wars 1 gets enough praise for this, but Guild Wars 1 was, in sheer size, a very big game by the time Eye of the North had come out. Prophecies alone, the initial launch of the game, was a huge MMO world, absolutely massive. It always looks bigger than it really is when you open up the map, admittedly, because it's all segmented off into small instances and explorable areas, but nevertheless, it was still a huge huge world, just that alone. And then they added factions, which added another huge continent, and Nightfall, which added another huge continent, and then finally Eye of the North expanded on the Prophecies continent even more. There's a map actually that compares video game worlds, which really nobody's ever really developed a decent standard for doing that in my opinion, but there's a map out there that shows Guild Wars 1 map, just Nightfall, as being absolutely huge, and that's completely off the mark. It looks way too big for what it should be, but nonetheless, Guild Wars 1 by the end of it had a lot of different areas, right? This guy, Nicholas the Traveller, was an NPC that was introduced to the world. As you might know, in Guild Wars 1, there is an area called Pre-Searing, and then there's the rest of the world. Pre-Searing, Ascalon, is a small tutorial zone for Prophecies characters that exists in a totally separate time zone and in a totally separate space to the rest of the game. So it was this beautiful scenic area, and once you reach a certain point in the plot, you could never go back there. And that's kind of what Pre-Searing Ascalon was. In Pre-Searing Ascalon, before this update came out, ArenaNet had released a small update that introduced a character called Nicholas, who would collect different items every day as a way of encouraging players to stay in Pre-Searing that enjoyed doing that kind of thing, for them to kind of get some kind of repeatable content out of that. Well, when this update on the 5th anniversary, I'm pretty sure it's the 5th, it might have been the 6th, if I'm wrong it's the 6th, but I'm pretty sure it's the 5th. When this update came out, they introduced the character of Nicholas, who already existed in Pre-Searing Ascalon from a previous update, but they updated him and they said, right, this is Nicholas the Traveller. This is the Nicholas 2 years later. This is what he's been doing. And it was a fantastic premise, right? I mentioned that the world's big. Nicholas the Traveller, every week from that point on, would appear in a location in Tyria. It could be anywhere in Tyria. There are a few places he wouldn't appear, but pretty much anywhere he could be. And ArenaNet wouldn't announce where his location was. They wouldn't say anything like that. They would just leave it up to the players to explore every corner of the world until they found Nicholas. Obviously, not every player had to do this, because when one player managed to find him, then they would release the information and everyone know where he was for that week following. But it introduced this really cool race, a lot of excitement at the start of every week where players would run out and look for Nicholas the Traveller. It was this fantastic, exciting thing that people could do. Not only this, when you found Nicholas, you'd find that he was looking for a certain amount of a specific trophy item. We're all familiar that in a lot of MMOs there are just random trash items that get thrown around or dropped from enemies. Well, Nicholas the Traveller was collecting these, a certain amount of them every week, and he'd give you gifts that would have really awesome, potentially really rare rewards in them, that you could open these gifts and see what you had inside, and they were always really, really cool, and they introduced all these new items. But the only way to get them was to find Nicholas, go and gather those trophies, try and farm them in some way, and then bring them to him. And just like the Zaitian missions and bounties that were introduced, this was something else. Players thought every week I'll go and I'll do this, and it really is unbelievable how much people enjoyed this update and loved to play with this kind of thing with Nicholas the Traveller there. It was this huge thing, and it really is, in my opinion, what kept PvP alive for a long time for a lot of players after that. I mean, after a while, players did once again obviously get all the items that these quests and Nicholas had to offer, but that was a long time coming, and it really revitalised the community, and it meant that certain empty outposts that had been barren of activity for years since the population had shrunk would one week suddenly have loads of people running around there because Nicholas was near there, and you would see new life brought into different areas of the game, and it would encourage players to go all over the world, not just end game areas, which is what tends to happen in MMOs, but everywhere. And it was a lot of fun, and it was a really cool concept. So now we're asking, at last, I've gone on for a bit long, but we're asking, are they going to do this with Guild Wars 2? They haven't actually announced it. They've talked about some of their ideas for endgame, and they've talked about a few of their philosophies. Obviously, titles are coming back in the way of achievements, so that's still there. But they haven't announced anything repeatable like this. It was such a big part of the game for Guild Wars 1 after a while. It was so good. And I guess we're kind of wondering, why haven't they announced this? My personal opinion is that yes, they will be there. ArenaNet would be fools not to add them. They know how big this update was. They know how important it is. They're not the only MMO to have started doing this kind of thing, and it is just something almost, I would consider, something core to making a satisfying endgame PvPE experience for players. And I'm sure that it is in their plans, but it also is kind of one of those features, dare I say it, that can be added toward the end of development. I don't think this is something that they'll put off until after release. I keep coming back to that on these mechanic videos. I don't think this will be something that they put off till all the way back then, but I do think that Nicholas, in some form, eventually, at the very least, will be back in the game, and it will be really, really cool to see what they do with it, because they can take the system a lot further. I'd love to see it that there were exclusive items that he might offer for 1 month that you can't get later on, to continue exciting people into finding him and figuring out what he's got. I mean, the more unique items and the rarer and more prestigious those items can become, the more people will feel excited when they get to open these gifts, like a little mini lottery that you can work for every week in the game. Really, really cool system. I don't think I've ever met someone that didn't like the Nicholas the Traveller system, and I personally, while no, it's not been 100% announced, do expect him to appear in some form. Right, well, I talked about that for so long, I guess we can have 2 quick questions from here. The first quick question comes from Junkie Smurf, who asked, what happens when allied ground-targeted skills and enemy ground-targeted skills overlap? Well, very simple, they don't interact with one another at all. There is room here for it to sound very complicated and weird. Like, for example, you might imagine a firewall and then a geyser just behind it, and now I shoot an arrow through the firewall, and now it's gone through the enemy geyser. Does the geyser put out the flaming arrow? Never heard of ArenaNet doing things that way. Enemy ground target skills won't debuff your own projectiles, if that makes any sense. The interaction between different skills going through these ground target things only works on your own team's side. So it really does remain as simple as whatever's allied for you and you shoot through should help out. And likewise, if you are standing in an AoE that an elementalist has placed that cripples you while also standing in an allied ground targeted ability that heals you, you'll both be crippled and healed. I mean, it really shouldn't come too far past that. I mean, I could imagine them maybe making it a lot more complicated, but at the moment combat looks so chaotic as it is. I'm wondering if they'll ever really want to do that, particularly considering the fact they've cut out a lot of other complicated mechanics that exist in games, like I talked about before, where now fire will not do more damage to icy opponents. They've removed all that kind of stuff, so I can't imagine them making the ground targeted things too complicated. They've got just enough to have some impact on the battles, but I don't think we'll really have to be considering too much at this point. I'm quite interested how that could turn out if they did end up doing that, but it's not on their agenda right now, and really they've made it as simple as possible. Different ground target abilities won't even stack as you go through things, so you can't shoot a single missile that goes through a chaos storm and then a lightning shield and then a fire shield and have like a triple buffed thing. It will only take 1 buff. It doesn't even stack like that anymore. So just try and think of it in its simplest terms, and you've got the system pretty much sorted right there. The other quick question, and this was going to be a long question, but I'll try and keep it quick, was asked by Shane Matthews, who said, will my personal storylines allow my character to get better skills, gear, or experience? Through which path do I choose? Or will all characters have the same gear, skills, experience that I do when I play? Is the storyline just a new way, or giving players the same stuff through different stories? Bit of a weirdly worded question, not going to lie to you, Shane, but if I understand what you're asking here, it's that will the different choices we make in our personal storylines potentially open paths to better gear than someone else? So you could, in essence, if you're looking at it just from a statistical standpoint, make the wrong decision. And the answer to that is no. ArenaNet have done their very best to make sure you won't get extra power from picking one decision than you would from another. They do seem to have opted for giving people cosmetic differences depending on what they've done in their personal story. So an example pulled right out of my arse might be you've killed a Hylek in one of your personal stories and now you've got a hat that looks like a Hylek head, and in the other one you've saved the Hylek but instead killed a Dredge and now you've got a hat that looks like a Dredge head. They could do stuff like that. There is a cosmetic level to that, but statistically no, and from what I've seen it doesn't matter what choice you've made, you always get the same rewards, at least in the earlier game stuff. So in Guild Wars 2 you actually get a choice for the rewards from what you've done, which didn't actually exist in Guild Wars 1. So you always get like 1 core item for completing the quest, but then you also get to choose 1 bit of equipment out of 3, for example, and one of those bits of equipment will give you power, 1 will give you a different attribute, 1 will give you a different, and you can kind of mix and match however you choose there. So there is choice in your rewards, but that choice is not dependent on what you've been doing in your personal story. They've tried to keep it separate so that the decisions you make as you play through your character are solely influenced by your motivations and your views on morality or whatever particularly difficult situation you've come across and what you decided to do there. Statistics shouldn't come into it, is their philosophy. It's interesting they've gone with cosmetic things are okay though, because I still think that compromises the integrity of someone playing through and making a decision about one thing when really they're just doing it for the item at the end, which is a bit interesting, but I don't think to date we've seen any examples of those particular rewards being used in game yet, so we can't comment too much either way just at the moment. But yeah, there you go, guys. That was Guild Wars 2 Daily. Thank you very much for watching. The footage, again, came in from Guild Wars Insider. Thanks very much to them for permission to use the footage. Yeah, as I said before, leave any mechanics questions you've got in the comment section down below. I'll be reading through all of them. And yeah, guys, I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.